Welcome to the speech that I'll be giving on libertarianism. What I'll be doing is 4 different things. First, I will go over what libertarian theory is. Then I will discuss common misconceptions and fallacies that people have with regard to libertarianism. Then, perhaps most interesting, I will discuss several libertarian controversies, where libertarians are hammer and tongs with each other, fighting, debating, divisive. That's the most fun. And then, last but not least, if I have time, and you behave yourself and don't ask me too many questions, I will be able to get into what I call advanced libertarian theory. The reason I want to do this is because I think we have a disparate group among libertarians. Some people are newcomers, some people are experts, so here hopefully there'll be something for everyone. So what is libertarianism? Libertarianism is the view that we should keep our midst to ourselves. We should not engage in murder, rape, theft, fraud, what have you. We should adhere to the libertarian axiom of non-aggression against non-aggressors. That's the first premise. The second premise is property rights. And you need property rights. You just can't have the first axiom on its own, because suppose I go out into the audience and grab, what's your name? What's your name?
Stark.
Yes? What's your name?
Stark.
Stark?
Yeah.
Suppose I go out and I grab Stark's wristwatch. Well, am I initiating violence against him or not? It depends upon whether it's his wristwatch or not. If it's his, I am. But on the other hand, if he stole it from me yesterday, then it's not violence, it's rather return of stolen property. So we have to have a theory of property rights, and the theory of property rights that libertarians have is that it's predicated first of all upon self-ownership. We all own ourselves. Secondly, we get to own those parts of nature that we mix our labor with, that we homestead. And then other ways of defending property or having just property would be what Robert Nozick calls legitimate title transfer. What's legitimate title transfer? Any voluntary interaction that people have with each other where they transfer property. So, for example, I might grow wheat, you might have domesticated a cow, you have milk, I have wheat, now we trade. So I now own the milk even though I didn't produce it, and you now own the wheat even though you didn't produce that, but we can trace it back to a legitimate title transfer from a legitimate title in the first place. Other ways of transferring property beside trade would be gifts, gambling, contracts, what have you, inheritance. Those are the different ways. Okay, now there are 3 areas on the basis of which we can judge libertarianism or any political philosophy. All political philosophies have to have an answer or have to have examined these 3 areas. First is foreign policy. Well, the libertarian view on foreign policy, consistent with non-aggression, is non-invasion, non-imperialism. We favor defense, a strong defense, but we don't favor going to other countries to fix them up for their own good or for our good or for anyone's good. The idea is just as individuals have to keep our midst to ourselves and off of other people's necks and their property, so too does the U.S. government have to keep itself away from other people and their property. The second one is economics. We all have to have a view on economics. And the view of libertarianism on economics is laissez-faire capitalism because, wait for it, that's the only economic system compatible with the non-aggression axiom. And not only is laissez-faire capitalism compatible with the non-aggression axiom, it also is very beneficial. It's why certain countries are rich and other countries are poor. Adam Smith wrote this wonderful book, The Wealth of Nations, and he found out that if you want to be wealthy, you have private property and trade, because all trade is mutually beneficial. If I trade you my tie for your pen, it must be that your pen is more valuable to me than my tie. So I gain the difference in the value between the pen and the tie. On the other hand, if you want this tie For the pen, you must rank the tie higher than the pen, otherwise you wouldn't be willing to trade me for it. You gain the difference between the value of these two things to you. Trade is mutually beneficial. And since all the market consists of is trade, buying, selling, renting, employing, the market is mutually beneficial. And any other system which denies this, of necessity, must be worse in terms of producing human welfare, because now it's coercion. Now, if I just grab your eyeglasses there, I might benefit, but you lose. So we can't determine that there's mutual benefit in that way. Let me give you an example of this. Two examples. One is the FDA and thalidomide. Now, the FDA approved of thalidomide, and thalidomide was a very good drug for morning sickness. Women who were pregnant who had it didn't have morning sickness. Unfortunately, 9 months later, they had birth defects. The FDA didn't disapprove of it. The German FDA did approve of it. As a result, we had mishaps. Well, my analysis of that is, well, that's the human condition. There's always error. That's why they put erasers on the back of pencils. To err is to be human, or to be human is to err. So there'll always be mistakes. But when there are mistakes, the benefit of the capitalist system is that the people who make the mistakes go broke. The bad thing here is not that the FDA created misery, it's that they were back at the same lemonade stand after they did that. So there's no continual improvement in certification of medicines. Another example is the situation that occurred in New Orleans, my hometown, in the aftermath of Katrina. The FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers, in my view, were responsible for some 1,100 deaths, which isn't so bad. Again, you know, there's always mistakes. The problem, though, is that FEMA and the Army Corps of Engineers continued to be in existence. That's the real problem, that you can't get rid of inefficiency through bankruptcy. And the reason that we have pretty good pizza and pretty good ties and pretty good wristwatches is that anyone incapable of making pretty good ones goes bankrupt. So the remainder are pretty good. The third one is personal rights, personal liberties. Should we legalize drugs? Heroin, marijuana? Yes. For adults. We should treat them roughly as we treat alcohol, because if I inject some crap into my veins, and I regard heroin as very bad, but if I do, have I violated anyone's rights? Have I initiated violence against anyone? Have I violated the libertarian axiom of non-aggression? No, I haven't. Therefore, I should be allowed to do it. Doesn't mean it's good. I don't favor doing it. I'm opposed to doing it. But the question is, should I be put in jail for non-invasive behavior? And libertarians say no. What about the Godzilla pill or the werewolf pill? You take the pill and all of a sudden you grow whiskers or something and you grow fangs and your ears get pointier and you start snarling and you're about to attack people. Should the law prevent ingesting the Godzilla or the werewolf pill? Well, I go pretty far down this direction and I say no. Because merely taking a pill is not per se invasive. Now, you might get invasive 3 minutes after, and the police should be following people who take these pills. So as soon as they make the first clawing, biting, kind of move, then they should plug them, because they're a danger. But the pill itself is not per se an invasion of the libertarian axiom, and we're using the libertarian axiom as our litmus test of what's right and what's wrong, what should be legal and what should not be. Okay, I've pretty much given you a 5-minute version of what libertarianism is. It's an introduction. I could speak for hours on this, but instead of going there, what I am now going to do is to consider a whole bunch of fallacies. People misinterpret libertarianism in various ways. First, atheism. For some reason, people think that if you're a libertarian, you have to be an atheist. It has nothing to do with libertarianism. I mean, you can believe in God, you can be a theist, an atheist, an agnostic, whatever you want to be, because you're not violating the libertarian axiom. Now, if you start killing people because they're not in your religion, well, then we have a problem, not because of the religion, but because of the killing people. Why do people think, newcomers to libertarianism, why do they think that it's atheistic It's because of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand was a very charismatic character. She wrote a brilliant book, or two or three. Many libertarians came from objectivism, the Ayn Rand philosophy, and some of them are virulent atheists, if I can use such a word, that if you're not an atheist, you're evil or something like that. But to be a theist is not necessarily to invade anyone, therefore theism is compatible with libertarianism. Second one, education. Some people think that libertarians are against education because we're against public education. But public education does not exhaust all possibilities of education, plain and simple. Namely, you could have private education, or you could have homeschooling, or you could have any other version of education. Libertarians favor education. We're just opposed to public education. Why are we opposed to public education? Because public education, or indeed public anything pretty much, violates, wait for it, the libertarian axiom of non-aggression. Because how do they get the money for public education? They say, hey, fellas, come on out and pay taxes for this, but taxes are compulsory levies. And compulsion against people's will is a violation of their rights. There's no difference in principle between me coming to you with a gun and saying, give me your money for education, or give me money so that I can spend it on whatever I want to spend it on as a criminal. Just because the majority of the people vote for taxation doesn't make it right. Which leads me to another misinterpretation or fallacy about economics, about libertarianism, and that is it's something sometimes called majoritarianism or legal positivism. One of the people who's now running for the Libertarian presidency is guilty of this fallacy, Mike Gravel. What he says is, whatever the majority wants, we have to promote. That's his vision of libertarianism. But that's not libertarianism, because it's always possible to say the majority favored X, but is X right? Or the majority favored X, but is X compatible with libertarianism? Or the majority favored X, but is X compatible with the non-aggression axiom? Now, many times it's true that the majority is sensible and will vote for libertarian kinds of things. But every once in a while, it's not. Look, if you were to take a Democratic election in Alabama in 1840 and ask them, is slavery justified? Well, I think there were more whites then than blacks, and if you didn't let the blacks vote, you'd get a majority that way. In Nazi Germany, if you would have said, well, should we pursue these policies or not to get Jews or homosexuals or whoever it is and put them in concentration camps, I think a majority would have favored it. Now, if they didn't, we can still imagine a majority favoring it, and just because a majority favors it doesn't make it right. Look, suppose a gang of 4 people breaks into my house and starts taking my TV. And they're a philosophical gang, so they're willing to dialogue with me. So I say, hey, tut, that's my TV, what are you doing? And they say, oh, no, we're Democrats, let's have an election. And the leader says, well, how many people think we should take Walter's TV? And all 4 of them raise their hand. And then, to be fair, they say, well, how many people think that we shouldn't take Walter's TV? And I raise my hand. And they say, see? Majority. So it doesn't make it justified just because the majority favors it. Michael, could you close the door because noise outside? Okay, another fallacy or another misunderstanding of libertarianism is people say, well, if we have libertarianism and we have laissez-faire capitalism, the poor will starve. Therefore, we have to have welfare. Well, first of all, if you want to get rid of poverty, the best way is laissez-faire capitalism. It's no accident that in countries that are proportionally more free enterprise, people are richer than in countries that are less free enterprise. In our country, which is relatively free enterprise, even the poor have color TVs and air conditioning and other things that would be the envy of many countries around the world where they don't have laissez-faire capitalism. Well, what about welfare? Well, there are people like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, who some people consider to be libertarians, but I don't consider them to be libertarians, at least on this issue, because they favor welfare. Well, what's wrong with welfare? One thing that's wrong with welfare, it's a compulsory levy. It's taking money from Peter, rich Peter, and giving it to poor Paul. A lot of times with corporate welfare, it's taking money from poor Peter and giving it to rich Paul, but that's another matter, and it doesn't really matter. Theft is theft, whether you take it from a poor person and give it to a rich person or vice versa. Another problem with welfare is that it ruined the black family. They say that if you put a frog into the water and you boil it slowly, it'll stay there and get burned. Whereas if you put a frog in the boiling water, it'll jump out. Well, slavery was like boiling water. You put the black people into slavery and it didn't ruin their family. Their family was as intact as a white family, minus a percentage point or two in 1910, 1920. The divorce rate, the illegitimacy rates were similar. Along came welfare in the 1960s, and this was like putting black people into water and boiling it slowly, and all of a sudden there's no more black family. You've got illegitimacy rates of 75%. The family, the intact family, is one of the best predictors of non-poverty. And a non-intact family or a female-headed family is an indication of poverty and crime and all sorts of social upheavals. Okay, another misinterpretation of libertarianism is some people say that if you want to be a libertarian, you have to be tolerant. Tolerant? What the hell's that got to do with the non-aggression axiom? You don't have to be tolerant. You can be hateful. I hate everybody, or I hate redheads, or I hate left-handed people, or I hate, Jews or blacks or any group. I hate baseball players. Baseball is evil. I hate them all. Am I a non-libertarian because I'm a hateful person? No. All I have to do is keep my mitts off of them and their property, and I'm a libertarian. I'm compatible with a non-aggression axiom. So hatefulness, tolerance, nothing to do with libertarian theory. Then there are people who say you have to live libertarianism. Well, if by live libertarianism means keep your hands off of other people and their property, fine. But what they mean is you sort of have to be tolerant and nice and all sorts of weird things. They make it up as they go along. Well, those things are adventitious to libertarianism. Remember, we've got that litmus test of libertarianism, non-aggression. Some people think that we favor drug use. Just because we want to legalize heroin, that somehow we favor the use of heroin. Nothing could be further from the truth.
What's wrong with heroin?
Well, I personally think, the question was what's wrong with heroin. I think that heroin is debilitating. I think it's true for a lot of other substances that I also think should be legal. Wine, whiskey, cigarettes. There are lots of things, excess food. I can prove it here. Just because we libertarians want to legalize something does not mean that we favor the use of. We might oppose the use of.
Is that the correct term, though, do you think, from a libertarian perspective? Legalize?
Well, either legalize or decriminalize. I'm not sure. It really doesn't matter. I want both. I don't want it to be criminalized. I want it to be legal. I just don't want people to interpret my advocacy of legalization or criminalization as support for the use of. There's an entirely different, there's a gigantic distinction, there's a wide chasm between favoring the use of and don't wanting to put people in jail for using it. And if you can't see that, they say, there's that joke, do you know the difference between a living room and a bathroom? And if the guy says no, then you say, don't come to my house. Well, if you don't know the difference between using heroin and advocating the use of and advocating the legalization of it, don't get into political economy because it's beyond your capacity. Okay, the next one is libertines. Libertarianism and libertinism have a lot of words in common, or a lot of letters in common. And people somehow think that if you're a libertarian, you're a libertine. You favor all sorts of exotic, sexual, God knows what. Sometimes it's confused with librarianism because libertarianism and library also have a lot of letters in common. But I assure you that libertarianism has got nothing to do with libraries except we want privatized libraries. And it's got nothing to do with libertinism except we don't want to put libertines, voluntary sexual libertines who are of the age of consent, that is. Kids are a different issue, different matter. We don't want to put them in jail, but we're not libertines. I'm sorry?
How do you deal with kids?
I've got kids on my advanced libertarian list. That's a tough one. Child pornography. I'll get to it. The next one I've got is guns. Again, we don't favor the use of guns or tell everyone to pack a gun. The Second Amendment just says you have a right to use a gun. We don't say you must, and that if you're not packing heat, you're not a libertarian. That's silly. But there are newcomers to our movement, and a lot of the newcomers misconceive libertarianism, so I'm just running through a list. The people who have been in the movement for a while know full well what's going on here, but the people out there in radio land who are going to hear this tape for the next 100 years, some of them might not know, and this might be helpful to us when we get newcomers. Another one is the market sexist? Well, females earn less than males. For every dollar that a male earns, a female earns 70 cents. So people say, well, the market is sexist. And similar for whites and blacks. Blacks earn less than whites. But the economics of it are very clear. Wages tend to equal productivity. And while women and men have equal productivity, women have as if a sack on their back, a 50-pound sack when they're racing with a man, and that is unequal division of household chores. Women do the lion's share of household chores. That's why they make less money. Look, if all women had to play the violin 6 hours a day, they would make less money in other jobs too. If you do anything for 6 hours a day, vis-a-vis other people that don't do that for 6 hours a day, you're going to be a little bit behindhand in the race. The proof of this is that when you take males and females who have never been married, not widowed, not divorced, not separated, not anything to do with marriage, the wage ratio is about the same. The male-female income gap disappears. So there's nothing sexist about the market. It's just because women have more interest or more involvement in household tasks, child rearing, house cleaning, things like that. The next one is, do libertarians favor nuclear energy? And the answer is no. We don't favor nuclear energy, nor are we opposed to it. We only insist that if you have a nuclear power plant, you don't have a Price-Anderson Act, which protects you from damage claims and enables you to get insurance coverage. The libertarian issue or the libertarian analysis of which energy is best, is it nuclear, is it coal, is it oil, is it wind, is it water, is it whatever, solar, is we don't know, we don't care. It's sort of like saying, well, what colored chairs should we have? These are purple. Should chairs be purple, or maybe they should be green or blue? No, libertarians have no view on that. All we say is let some people make blue chairs, green chairs, pink chairs, and let's see who buys what. That would be our view. We have no dog in this race, as we say in Louisiana and in the South. We don't care. Let 100 flowers bloom, as Uncle Mao said, and let the market decide. Should we have blue and red striped ties or blue shirts or pink shirts? Libertarians had nothing to say about that, despite the fact that some libertarians mouth off about that. If they do, they're not talking qua libertarians, they're talking on their own. Some people think, well, big business will take over. If we have laissez-faire capitalism, big business will take over. The danger of big business is not big business is taking over. There are always small competitors who will outcompete big business. And if they say the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Well, if they get too big, they can't plan. They have no internal markets. They don't depend. They cannot avail themselves of markets. They are dependent upon all, or they're hurt by all the problems that face socialism of a government. The next one is voluntary socialism. Are we against socialism? What is our view on socialism? Well, if by socialism you mean government ownership of the major industries or most industries, obviously we're against it because we're against government ownership, because government is per se an invasive force. So we're pretty much against government. So if we're against government control of resources. But what about socialism as defined in a different way, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need? That also was a Marxist doctrine. And here, libertarians can accept this as long as it's done on a voluntary basis. For example, the commune, the kibbutz, the nunnery, the family. The little girl doesn't eat in accordance with her ability to produce income. She eats in accordance with her needs based on voluntary family interactions. So we can accept voluntary socialism, the kibbutz, whatever it is, as long as it's not subsidized by the rest of the society who don't want to join that. The next fallacy or misconception of libertarianism is that somehow we're liberals because we agree with liberals on certain issues of free speech and sexual laws and drug laws. Well, yes, we agree with them on those things. Nor, another fallacy, are we conservatives because we agree with them on free enterprise. In actual point of fact, the conservatives are very weak supporters of free enterprise, maybe better than liberals. And actually, the liberals are very weak supporters of personal rights, maybe a little bit better than conservatives, but that's not saying much. See, a lot of people think that if you favor free enterprise, you have to be pro-war, like conservatives. Or if you favor personal liberties, you have to be against economic freedom. And they see libertarianism as sort of, well, you guys are contradicting yourself. And we are contradicting ourselves if you take as political philosophy, mainstream political philosophy. Yes, we're contradicting that, but we are the only ones who are internally consistent because we are the only ones who adhere to the axiom of non-aggression in every area: foreign policy, domestic policy, economics, and personal liberties. Another fallacy is that libertarians are all rich and we favor the rich. Well, some libertarians are rich. But we don't, and we favor the rich in the sense we want to be rich. Nothing wrong with being rich. I remember McCain was once asked in one of the Republican debates about something, and he said, "These guys made profits, and profits are no good." Well, we're not against profits, honestly earned, but we certainly don't favor subsidies from the poor to the rich. And we don't think that there's anything wrong with being rich, but we don't favor the rich. We're neutral, just as we're neutral on alternative energy sources. We're neutral on just about everything, except for the non-aggression axiom. We're against people who violate other people's rights, and that's it. And rich people do not necessarily do that, although many of them do. What about health care? The view is we're against health care because we're against socialized medicine. But that's nonsense. We favor health care, private health care. The reason health care is so expensive is because the powers that be have organized things in such a way that it's very difficult to get the number of doctors we need. They place barriers to entry for physicians. That's why physicians make about 5 times as much, sometimes 4 times as much as people with a PhD in biology or chemistry. Because we have artificial restrictions on entry of doctors. Doctors make very, very big salaries because there are so few of them. We prevent foreign doctors from coming in. We prevent medical schools from taking in more people. If I try to start a medical school right now and hire doctors who would be good professors, I'd be thrown in jail for violating the AMA and other health regulations. Look, we don't need insurance for paper clips. Where's the rubber band insurance? It's, everyone's mouthing off, it's horrible that 10% of the people are not covered by health insurance. There'd be no problem if health insurance were a lot cheaper, like rubber bands and paper clips. And the reason it's not a lot cheaper, maybe not as cheap as that, but a lot cheaper, is because we have very few doctors. If our laws would allow us to have more doctors, we wouldn't have that crisis.
Quick question or comment. A friend, when I was in a debate with someone concerning the AMA and the FDA, but especially the AMA, they don't actually have they're not an organ of the government, but they do have, how do they...
In order to set up a new medical, the question is the AMA is not really part of the government, but in order to set up a medical school, you need AMA permission. That's the way the law is orchestrated.
Within the United States?
Yeah, within the United States. I'm talking...
The whole globe out there.
Oh, yeah, well, there are other countries also which restrict entry into medicine as well, in Europe and other countries, but I'm mainly focusing on the U.S.
So they do indirectly certainly have the power
Yes.
of the gun or the state.
Yes.
Behind,
Yeah. The AMA is a very powerful quasi-government. What fascism is government-private cooperation. Well, the AMA is a perfect example of that. The next fallacy is that we're pacifists. Since we don't want to have 700 military bases in 130 different foreign countries? I'm sorry, is that the right number? We must be pacifists. Well, no, we're just anti-imperialists. Look, if any other country had its military bases in 130 different countries and had 700 military bases in 130 other countries, say China or Russia, we'd feel very put upon. We'd feel encircled. Michael?
Are you taking questions now or later?
Well, I don't know what I'm doing. You think I know what I'm doing? Let me just keep going. I'll take questions at the end. Okay, so we're not pacifists, even though we oppose the initiation of force. We favor defense, a strong defense, and there are critics of us who say, well, since you don't favor military bases, you're really a pacifist. No, nothing could be further from the truth. I have now on my list a group called Libertarians for Force and Fraud, started by my friend Anthony Gregory, who's sitting in the back there. Co-founder. Who was the other?
Jeff Riggenbach.
Jeff, who?
Jeff Riggenbach.
Oh, I didn't know Jeff Riggenbach was a co-founder. I'm glad you're here to correct me. Jeff Riggenbach and Anthony Gregory started this group called Libertarians for Force and Fraud. It's a joke. You can't be a libertarian if you're for force and fraud, but there are so many libertarians who should know better, who make these elementary fallacies, that we figured we'd start this group to just sort of make fun of it. But it's unfortunately serious, because so many people who call themselves libertarians err on many of these very basic fallacies. Okay, I'm now into part 3. Part 1 was what is libertarianism. Part 2 was fallacies and misconceptions of libertarianism. I now get into part 3, controversies. We're heating it up a little. Now we're getting into more advanced libertarianism. Now that you people know everything that there is to know about basic libertarianism, we're moving on and up. As the Jeffersons, I think, we're moving on up. That used to be their theme song, the Jeffersons. I used to watch that when I was a lot younger, to an apartment in the sky or something like that. Okay, we're moving on up to controversies. The first one is, what should the Libertarian Party do? And in general, well, just the Libertarian Party. Should we win the election or should we educate? And there are various people in the Libertarian Party that have views on both sides of that issue. To me, it's sort of a non-question. We're not going to win. I mean, poor Ron Paul, who is the best of us in terms of well-spoken and public recognition and this and that, and you know, he's getting his 2, 3, 5, 10% of the vote. He's being excluded from debates. He's being dissed, as we say, by the media. They interrupt him. They don't let him. How is Mary Ruwart or Bob Barr, who I think are the leading contenders for election right now as I speak, how are they going to do better than him? It's silly. We're not going to win. I mean, you know, these people are delusional. Yeah, we're going to win. You know, win for, I don't know, mother or something. I don't know what. That's crazy. We're not going to win this election. The only thing is education. Well, if you're going to educate, do you have to pull punches? Do you have to compromise? Do you have to say, well, they're not ready for this or they're not ready for that view? No, you just tell it like it is. You try to promote libertarianism. The idea behind the Libertarian Party is that every 4 years, scratch that ordinary people, what are they interested in? They're interested in their bowling league. They're interested in their yacht or their rowboat. They're interested in playing tennis or eating pizza and drinking beer, or growing flowers or playing chess. I mean, people have many, many, many interests. Politics is not one of them for most people. But every 4 years, people start saying, hey, you know, what's happening? And they get interested in politics. So this serves as a vehicle that every 4 years or every 2 years or whatever it is, we can all of a sudden engage in some teaching. So let's teach them. But if we're going to teach them, let's teach them what libertarianism really is. Let's not teach them some sort of watered-down version of quasi, demi, semi-libertarianism, which is hardly recognized as libertarian. Okay, so that's one controversy. The next controversy is immigration. Now, most libertarians favor open borders. And there are all sorts of good stories about borders being open. All of us are immigrants. Even the native Indians weren't here first. They might have been here 10 or 11,000 years ago, but they too were immigrants. We all came from Africa. So we're all immigrants. How does immigration fit with the violation of the non-aggression axiom? Do you per se, by crossing a border, going from here to here or from here to here, do you per se violate anyone's rights? Do you violate the non-aggression axiom? Well, there are very eminent libertarians who say that you do. Hans Hoppe and Murray Rothbard are, I exalt them. I think they're wonderful libertarians. I think they're two of the most creative libertarians on the planet in the history of libertarianism. And they both say yes. Why do they say yes? Because they compare three things. They compare free trade in goods, free trade in investments, and movement of peoples, namely labor. Well, what happens when you have free trade in goods, I buy a banana from Costa Rica, is that there are two consenting parties. The guy in Costa Rica agrees to sell me a banana and I agree to buy it. Or if I invest in Peru, I take $1,000 and I buy a Peruvian, whatever it is in Peru I buy. We again have two people who agree. Remember, the essence of free enterprise is two people have to agree. But in immigration, there aren't two people who agree, say Hoppe and Rothbard. Rather, there's this guy who just goes there. And that's one reason why they think that there's a disanalogy between the free movement of goods, the free movement of investment, and the free movement of labor or people. Another point that they make, and by the way, I disagree with them, but I'm trying to be fair and give their views. Another point that they make is, well, immigration isn't a right. It's rather forced integration. It's trespass. We in America own America, and who are those guys to come over here without a buy or leave? They just sort of trot over here. Who the hell are they to trot over here in our country? We own this country. That's the anti-immigration. The pro-immigration view I just gave you, it's not a per se violation of anyone. My attempt to reconcile this controversy is as follows. What I say is, look, what the Libertarian Party should stand for, what libertarians should stand for, whether they're part of the party or not, is the following. As long as there's 1 square inch of U.S. territory that is not occupied, or is occupied by government, and is hence an illicit occupation, we should have open borders. Look, suppose that an immigrant takes a helicopter, and he helicopters his way into the middle of the Rocky Mountains where it's unhomesteaded. Now remember what we said about homesteading? You mix your labor with the land. If it's unhomesteaded, if it's not part of the ownership, why is it violation of libertarian rights for this guy to helicopter himself into the middle of Alaska or the middle of Colorado or the middle of Wyoming? Whose rights did he violate? No one's. So to prevent him from doing it is a violation of his rights. It's an initiation of violence against him. Also, public libraries, public parks, public roads, public anything are, as far as libertarian theory is concerned, what? Unowned? Illegitimately owned? Owned by a thief? Something like that, because the government is a thief. Well, suppose I just march into a library, or not steal a library book, but liberate a library book. Have I taken something from a rightful owner? No, because those bad guys don't have a right to it because they stole the money to buy this in the first place. So my claim is, okay, you guys, I'm president of the U.S. Look, I can be a little grandiose. I just won on the libertarian ticket. I say, okay, you guys, you don't want open borders? Fine. Let's legitimately own every square inch of territory, and then I'll close the borders. Because then to come in without permission of some landowner would be trespass. And trespass is a violation of property rights. So that's my attempt to reconcile that one. Abortion. Abortion is another very complex issue. There are libertarians on both sides of this one. I would venture to say that most libertarians are pro-life. Pro-choice. Woman has a right to abort. There's a minority of libertarians who are pro-life. Woman must carry the fetus for 9 months. This is a very complex area, a very complex issue. We're now moving into advanced libertarian theory. But again, we have our litmus test, we have our axioms, we have our non-aggression, and we have our private property rights. And on the basis of that, I have come up with a third choice. You see, the way people see it, it's either pro-life or pro-choice. Not so, not so. There is a third option, and the third option is evictionism. Now, what pro-life says is that the woman must be forced to keep the fetus for 9 months. What pro-choice says is that the woman can evict the fetus at any time, whether it means killing it or not. What the moderate, they don't call me Walter Moderate Block for nothing. What the moderate Walter Block says, what the evictionist says is, you have only the right to evict, but you don't have a right to kill. Why do you have a right to evict? Because you own the property. If you're the woman, you own the uterus, thanks. A little weak on theory here. You own the uterus. Thus, you have a right to evict, but you don't have a right to kill. I mean, if somebody walks into this hotel and, some bumbles into your living room, you don't have a right to shoot him. First you say, do you realize you're trespassing? And this guy, oh, sorry, I didn't realize, and he walks out. If you shoot him in the back, you're not compatible with libertarianism. So you have no right to kill, only to evict. Now, the problem with fetuses is that if you evict them at a certain age, they'll die. Too bad, there's no right to life. Never mentioned right to life. Only property rights and the non-aggression axiom, no right to life. Now, in the early days, 50 years ago, the only way to evict was to kill. In 500 years from now, you know that you'll be able to evict at any stage of gestation and keep a viable fetus. Right now, at around the 8th or the 9th month, a fetus can be viable. So, and as medical science progresses, the age of viability will shrink back down toward the fertilized egg stage.
Isn't it even earlier that a fetus could be viable than the 8th month? I don't
Well, it might be, the question is, can the fetus be viable before the 8th month? Well, every 5 years it gets viable another week or so on average. I don't know whether it's the 7th or the 8th or the 6th or the 9th, it doesn't matter. The principle is, as medical science progresses, the fetus will be viable at an earlier stage. Well, but libertarianism is not dependent upon medical science. What we say is, you can evict at any time, but you can't ever kill. 50 years ago, we libertarians, the evictionist theory was then pro-choice. 500 years from now or 100 years from now, we'll be pro-life. Right now, we're just moderates. We say, you can evict, you just can't kill. Now, there are two objections to this. One is, well, there's a implicit contract between the mother and the fetus to keep the fetus around for 9 months. Now, I'm a fan of implicit contracts. If you buy a cup of coffee and you drink it down and then they present you with a bill for $1 trillion, you don't have to pay $1 trillion. There was no meeting of the minds. There was no contract. Maybe $5, or if it's fancy latte, $10. And I don't know where the exact drawing point is where it's legitimate and not. Somewhere maybe $15 tops for a cup of coffee, but not $1 million. So I'm open to the idea of implicit contracts. But I insist for there to be an implicit contract, there have to be two parties. And at the point of intercourse, if we forget about the father, we're namely relating the mother and the fetus, and what rights does the fetus have vis-a-vis the mother. There's no contract to have the baby. Well, at the time of intercourse, there were no two people. Even there was no fertilized egg. Because I hate to tell you people about the birds and the bees, the way it works is that after intercourse, the sperm gets into the egg. And even then, you can't have a contract with a fertilized egg. We're getting on to kid pornography, but the youngest kid is a fertilized egg. Another objection to my very sensible theory, if I say so myself, is that if I push someone into the water and then he starts to drown, then I owe a positive obligation which otherwise I wouldn't owe a positive obligation to. So what they're trying to say is by having a child, you're putting him at risk, and therefore you owe him to keep him alive for 9 months. My claim is that by giving birth to a child, you're not harming him. You're not putting him in a worse position. You're putting him in a better position because before the sperm and the egg meet, there's no person at all. Surely it's better to be a person for a little time than not at all. So I reject the analogy that you're throwing someone in the water and therefore you have an obligation to save them. Obviously, libertarians aren't, what do you call those laws where you have to save good Samaritans? We don't believe in good Samaritan laws. You don't have an obligation to fetch drowning people out of the water, because if you don't, you haven't violated their rights, unless you put them in there. But I deny that having a child is like putting them in deep water and they can't swim. Okay, here's another objection, or here's another controversy among libertarians, and that is between anarchism and minarchism, between limited government libertarianism and anarchist libertarianism. Now, I am on the anarchist side. The reason I'm on the anarchist side is because I believe that the government is per se an invasive organization. It does two things. One, it taxes you against your will. And two, it prevents anyone from competing with it in a certain geographical area for to be another government. In other words, if I said, look, I'm setting up the Walter Block government right here, the U.S. government would have something to say against me, even though I didn't violate anyone's rights. I say, look, in my government, competing government, if there were such a thing, which there isn't, people pay me voluntarily and I'll protect you. The U.S. government would not allow that because they would want sovereignty over me. And I would say they don't have that justification. The limited government view, based on the writings of Rand, Mises, Nozick, I think the preeminent anarchist libertarian is Murray Rothbard. The main people who've contributed to minarchism or limited government libertarianism are Rand, Mises, and Nozick. And what they say is, yes, we should have laissez-faire capitalism, but there are three functions or three jobs that only the government can do. One is protect people's rights against foreign enemies, in which case we need an army. Another is to protect people's rights against domestic enemies, in which case we need a police force. And the third one is to have courts to determine who is right and who's wrong, and to adjudicate differences of opinion. Now, I think that we had this thing called the Dallas Accord, where in the Libertarian Party we recognized that we had anarchists and we had minarchists, and we had to cooperate, and what we would do is no one would say anything specifically against the other guy's view. So if you're asked, what's your view about courts, you could say, or this is what I usually say. No way to make that noise lower?
I could ask.
If you would, I'd appreciate it. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. When I'm anarchy-baited, when I'm asked if I'm an anarchist and I don't want to appear as an anarchist, I say, well, if what you mean by anarchy is chaos and craziness, then I'm against it. If what you mean is rule of law or private property rights, then I'm in favor of it. Some people think that the etymological background of anarchism is archy, as in an arc, as in a building, but that's not true. See, what they say, and this is a basic fallacy of people who don't understand anarchism, is that if the proper etymological background of anarchism is archy, means rule, arbitrary rule. So monarchy means arbitrary rule by a monarch. Democracy, demarchy, means arbitrary rule by a majority. Oligarchy means arbitrary rule by a few people. Anarchy means no arbitrary rule by anyone. It doesn't mean chaos. It just means non-arbitrary rule. We've already gone over majoritarianism, and we've said that just because the king or the monarch or the oligarch says it doesn't mean it's right. We can always ask if it's right.
Is oligarchy, does that kind of almost imply family?
No. Oligarchy just means few.
Okay.
It's sort of like monopoly, duopoly, oligopoly. Olig means few, doesn't mean family.
The Communist Politburo would be a good example.
Yes, they're not related to each other. The Communist Politburo would be a good example
That would be
of.
an oligarch.
Right. Michael, since other people are raising hands, I'll call on you.
I was out for a few minutes. Is this a question and answer period?
No. Okay, let me continue. I'm almost finished. I'm almost finished with controversies, and we'll soon get into advanced libertarian theory, and then I'll have more questions. Okay. One last point on this anarchy business. If you really think that a state is needed or a government is needed because without a state, different people will fight with each other, what you are logically implied to take is a view that favors world government. Because world government is to national governments as national governments aren't to individuals. Look, right now the status between the U.S. and Bolivia is one of anarchy. Because there's no world government above both of us. If you forget that the U.S. is like a world government, forget that for the moment. The relationship between, Peru and Portugal is one of anarchy. Namely, there's no government above the two of them. We don't count the UN as a government. So if you're really against anarchy, you have to favor world government. And most people don't realize that. If they did, they wouldn't be so hopped up about archy. Okay, the next debate that plagues libertarians is timing. Should we get rid of the state and get rid of evil right now, quickly? Or should we have this gradual thing over the next 100 years? We reduce taxes by 1% a year for 100 years, or 10% a year for 10 years. And my view is the view of Garrison, who said that gradualism in theory is perpetuity in practice. Look, suppose we were back in 1850 and we had the ability to eliminate slavery by pressing a button right here. If we had the ability to press a button and end slavery, and we refuse to do so on the grounds that people aren't ready for it yet, or it'll create chaos or anything like that, well, then we're not acting compatibly with libertarianism, because libertarianism says that the non-aggression axiom is supreme. Slavery is contrary to that, and we're not acting in a libertarian way by pressing that button. Especially, we should realize that there have been various places where abrupt change occurred, and it was very beneficial. See, people think that if it's too abrupt, it'll create havoc and chaos. Well, the Berlin Wall fell like that. People didn't realize that it didn't fall gradually, it just fell. The USSR went kablooey all in a rush. Another example is Ludwig Erhard. They had wage and price controls in Germany in 1946 after World War II, and it was stultifying the German economy. And Ludwig Erhard got up on the radio on a Sunday night and said, "Throw away your ration cards. Tomorrow there's no price controls." And that was the birth of the German economic miracle. So these are examples where gradualism is not required, where you can have abrupt change and it's beneficial. Okay, I now move on to advanced libertarian theory. And I want to cover 6 or 8 things, so I'm going to go very quickly through it. Voluntary slavery. What about voluntary slavery? Is it justified to have voluntary slavery? Now look, you got to distinguish between coercive slavery and voluntary slavery. Coercive slavery is you grab someone, you smack him around, and now he's your slave. That's bad. But what about voluntary slavery? Suppose, God forbid, one of my children has a horrible disease, and it's going to cost $5 million to fix the disease. And one of you out in the audience has long wanted me to be your slave, and I value my kid's life more than I value my freedom. And I make a deal. I say, okay, look, give me $5 million, I'll give it to my kid's doctors, and now I'll come be your slave. Is this a legitimate contract? My claim, and Nozick is the only other libertarian who agrees with me. Every other libertarian disagrees with me. I'm not Walter Moderate Block here. But I insist that I have the right view, that it is a legitimate contract, and that if the contract calls for whipping or even killing me, it depends upon what the slave contract calls for, it's justified as long as 2 people agree. Now, the critics say, well, you can't alienate the will. I'm not interested in the will. The hell with the will. I'm interested in, when you whip me for disobeying, do you go to jail, or do I go to jail, or do the police support you in whipping me? And my claim is that if the contract allows you to whip me, then you should be allowed to whip me because I'm your slave fair and square. We do have other instances of justified slavery, not of the voluntary sort, and that is if you're a criminal. And the libertarian theory is you have to make restitution and we're afraid you're going to run away. Well, then it's justified to keep you posted or keep you tied up there until you work your way out of your restitution, which means a form of slavery. Intellectual property is advanced libertarian theory. Are patents justified? No, patents are not justified because you can't own ideas. You can only own things that are scarce. You can own wristwatches and shirts and ties and things like this because there are only so many of them. Look, the whole idea of property rights is to stop us from fighting each other over things. If we didn't have scarcity of things, if I wished for a bicycle and a bicycle would come here, if I wished for a Maserati, I'd get a Maserati, we wouldn't need property rights. The function of property rights is what's mine and what's thine so we don't fight. Well, if there's no reason to fight, why do we need property rights? But we'll always need property rights. Because suppose we all want to go to bed with, who's the young, beautiful movie star nowadays? I sort of lost track. Britney Spears? No? It shows that I know it's not Marilyn Monroe. Is it Paris Hilton? I don't know. Somebody. We all want to go to bed with her. Now, under this magical thing, we can get a lot of Paris Hiltons, but there's only one real one. And if we all want to go to bed with her, we still have scarcity. We still need property rights. We'll never get out of property rights. But the point is, the only reason for intellectual property rights is scarcity, and since ideas are not scarce, there's no need for them. For example, if one girl puts her hair up in a ponytail, or one boy puts his hair up in a ponytail, we've got Anthony here with a ponytail, and another girl sees it and says, wow, that's great, I'll put my hair up in a ponytail. Did the second girl steal anything from the first girl? No. She didn't go to the first girl and say, well, I'm going to take your ponytail apart. Or if somebody comes up with a way of making a log cabin with the groove thing, instead of just log cabins, logs without the groove, tongue and groove, and now I do it with my logs, have I taken anything from you? No. Look, if you really own something, I own this jacket, I own it forever, I can give it to my kids, and my kids can give it to their kids. But in patents, if I invent something, I only get to own it for 27 years or whatever the number of years is. Why? If I own it, I should own it. There's also a performative contradiction in intellectual property. Right now, I'm talking, and let's say I'm saying intellectual property is great. I just used the words intellectual property is great. But somebody invented all of those words. Mr. Intellectual invented the word intellectual. Mr. Property invented the word property. Mr. Is invented the word is. Who am I to use the words without paying somebody? You see the point I'm making? If people could really own ideas and words are ideas, then we couldn't speak because we would be violating other people's property rights. But if we can't even speak, and in order to take a view on property rights, we have to speak or write, well, then we are prohibited by the laws of logic from even defending intellectual property rights. So intellectual property rights are dead from the neck up. Now, some people say from the pragmatic point of view, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have inventions. Well, this is an empirical issue. On the one hand, yes, there's more encouragement for inventions if you have patents. On the other hand, right now, to make an invention, you have to go circuitously around other people's patents, and you have to pay a lot of high-priced lawyers to invent anything. So it's unclear as to which way you're going to go. Look, I have a book here, by the way, it's for sale. Wonderful book, Defending the Undefendable. My mother thinks it's a great book, or she did. Suppose one of you takes this book and puts your name on it. Well, that would be fraud. But suppose you just copy it, and you admit it's my book, and you start selling it. Now, you'll take some of my customers away. So will this discourage me from making books? On the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, I'll get more speaking engagements at higher prices the more books of mine you sell. It's sort of like Anthony, pick on him again, is a musician. If he cuts a record, or a disc, what's the latest way to say that?
8-track.
You 8-track something. You see where I'm at in this technology, and now I copy it and I start selling it. Yes, I'll take some of his customers away. But on the other hand, the more I sell, the more people want to hear him and give him gigs and pay for his services. So it's an empirical issue. It's unclear as to which way it'll go. But remember, we libertarians are not, for us, dog is rights and utility is the tail, not the other way around. So for us, the rights are no intellectual property. And if you have more inventions or less inventions, it doesn't really matter. Rights uber alles. Okay, I'm almost out of time, and since I have a whole bunch of other things, blackmail, libel, taking money from government, polygamy, murder park, punishment theory, private defense forces, but since I've been asked about kid porn, I'll end on child pornography. This is a rough one. It's another complex one. I gave abortion as a complex issue. Another, before I get into kid porn, unions are also a complex issue. Are unions legitimate? In my talk on economics, I said that unions were not very beneficial in terms of raising wages, but now I'm asking, are they legitimate? And it's complex because if unions limit themselves to a walkout en masse, they're legitimate. Because if one person has a right to quit a job, everyone has a right to quit a job. And if you don't have a right to quit a job, you're a slave and not a voluntary slave either. Well, what's going on with kid with kid porn.
The question had to do with the segregated legal requirements for children across the board. For example, you said heroin would be okay for an adult to voluntarily consume,
Right.
but not a child.
Right.
How do you implement restrictions on children without, say, ID cards?
Michael?
I have a question too.
Oh, okay, I'll call on you after him. I believe that this non-aggression axiom and contracts and property rights is for adults, not for kids. I think that kids don't have the wherewithal to be responsible for themselves. I think that we should have something of the order of statutory rape. If a 50-year-old man goes to bed with a 4-year-old girl, I think he is guilty of a crime, even if she consented. Namely, she didn't cry, she didn't object, she just said, giggled or whatever it is. I think that's a crime per se. The only question for me is, should we have an age cutoff, which is a little arbitrary, or should we just say, well, below a certain age category, and you have to have some sort of category, the presumption is this, but if you have an emancipated child, sometimes you have 12 or 13-year-old children who are emancipated through a court, they're allowed to live as adults. That's a possibility. You see, what we have here is a continuum problem. Suppose I launch my fist at you. Now, in this context, I'm so far away from you, 10 feet away from you, and the context is, I'm not going to hurt you, I'm just using it as an example. If I did this and you shot me, you would be guilty of a crime, I would not be. But if it's in a dark alley and I come rushing at you and you don't know what's going on and you see a fist coming at your nose, you can shoot me in self-defense. Well, where is the cutoff point? How close do you have to be? What the context is? Libertarians has no answer to that question. We don't have an answer to every question. All we have is a set of principles, and the set of principles has to be adjudicated by courts. Another case of this continuum problem is salvage. If I lose my boat and I swim away from it and the boat sinks and now you salvage the boat, according to the private admiralty courts, I get 2/3 of the value, you get 1/3 of the value. That's pretty arbitrary. Why not 40%, 60%, or 75, 25? Well, we had private courts that decided that, so that's good enough for me. Cutoff points for statutory rape are similar. I know 6 years old is way too young, and I know 26-year-old is way too old, but somewhere in between 13, 14, 15, 17, 19 is the cutoff point. Now, whether you make it an absolute cutoff point or you say, well, if the girl is 16, let's say the cutoff point is 17, then the presumption is that it's statutory rape, and it can be rebutted if you can prove that this girl is an adult or something like that. So it's the same thing with pornography. Now, there is one caveat which makes it very difficult and complex, and that is, suppose my kid I have a 4-year-old kid, and I'm starving. I have no way to keep the kid alive except to allow the kid to be raped in a pornographic movie. Which is child abuse? To let the kid die or to let the kid engage in pornographic rape movie? Well, my view is you got to keep the kid alive. I don't care how psychologically debilitating rape is. It's not as bad as being dead. Once you're dead, it's all over. If you've had debilitation, you're okay. Or at least potentially you can have a life. So I would say the exception for kid porn is to save the kid's life. But other than that, I think child pornography is a per se criminal activity as long as the child is younger than whatever that cutoff point is. Now, let's take child pornography cartoons. I draw up a cartoon of a kid getting raped. Is that a crime against the person? No. Because remember, the libertarian axiom of non-aggression has to be non-aggression against the person. And all I'm doing is drawing cartoons, and now pedophiles are getting off on it. Well, God bless the pedophiles. I shouldn't have said that because people could take that out of context. But what I'm saying is that as long as there's not a crime against the person, there's no crime. And if all you do is a cartoon, okay, now it's not a cartoon. A lot of people take nude pictures of their babies, a 3-month-old, 6-month-old. It's not pornographic because, you just sort of stick it in a picture folder. But suppose a pedophile got a hold of it and started getting off on that. Is that a crime? No, because there's no victim. Or suppose there's a snuff film of a kid or an adult, it doesn't matter. And I'm not talking about a voluntary snuff film. I'm talking about a coercive snuff film, and I'm the pornographer. I take the film, and I should go to jail because I'm a murderer. But I just leave the film right here, and one of you picks it up and now watches it. Are you guilty of a crime? I say no. On the other hand, if you pay me for it, if I sell you the snuff film or the child porn film or whatever it is, and you pay me for it, now you're actively aiding and abetting me in doing pornography, or doing murder, rather, and that would be illegal. So that's why I say it's a complex issue. It's for advanced libertarian theory. And with that, I now end my formal remarks